even is stuffing? The stuffing that people here in the US commonly have at our November Feast of Thanksgiving is a savory bread pudding that is a mass of wet bread. It's weird when I think how old I was before I figured that out. Like, we had stuffing every Thanksgiving and Christmas growing up. I loved it, had no idea what it was. You could have told me it's Soylent Brown, but it's bread, mostly bread, wet bread. Here's some less easily answered questions. If this is stuffing, is this stuffing, even though it's not in the bird, or is it dressing? Or are they both dressing? Why do some people say dressing instead of stuffing? Why am I saying stuffing and not dressing? Is all dressing or stuffing really made of bread? And why would we have wet bread with our chicken or turkey in the first place? Also, how do you make it? Come, friends, let us seek these answers together. Putting things inside meat is a very old practice. People generally point to this 1st century Roman cookbook as the first written example. Lots of stuffed meats in here, but surely this is a practice millennia older than Rome, or writing. I reckon there are 2 conditions of pre-modern cooking that would have made stuffing advantageous: scarcity of ingredients and scarcity of tools. Virtually all food is vastly more plentiful today than it has been for most of human history, but especially so meat. If you're in a situation where you've got way more hungry mouths than beasts to slay, you're looking for ways of stretching your meat, making a little bit of meat feed a lot more people. Soup or stew is a great way of stretching meat. All the animal's nutrition stays in the broth, and it flavors all the other stuff in the broth. But if you're roasting your meat, you're sacrificing much more of its precious nutrition to the fire. All of that melting fat and protein-rich juice is just dripping away. One way to salvage it is to put a tray of some kind under the beast and put some absorbent food on that tray, potatoes in this case, but instead put in a batter of wheat flour, eggs, and milk, and you would have Yorkshire pudding in there. The drip tray with edible stuff on it addresses our pre-modern scarcity of ingredient problem. It doesn't really address our scarcity of tool problem when one considers that having a flame and water safe tray of some kind to put under your food is not something that humans could have taken for granted until pretty recently, at least not most humans. And hey, why would you be roasting meat over a fire in the first place? Certainly one reason might have been that you didn't have a pot with which to make soup or stew. Putting absorbent food into the meat solves all these problems. Whatever you've got, some grains, some bread, some dried fruits, some tubers, some rice, you just jam it in there and it absorbs a lot of the goodness that would otherwise have just been wasted when it dripped away. And then the meat itself becomes the cooking vessel. You don't need a pot or a tray. The meat is the pot. For that same reason, you might put non-absorbent things inside meat too, like other meat, little scraps of flesh or fat or organs that you've got. Like, you try cooking a brain on a spit over a fire. It wouldn't work. You gotta stick it inside something else. And there are tons of historic recipes for meat stuffed into other meat, but they usually have some absorbent plant material in there as well, and stale bread is really the perfect thing for the job. Until the 20th century, most Americans, for example, would have eaten way more bread than anything else, and that bread would have not contained modern dough conditioners that delay staling. It would have gone hard and dry within a day of baking, and stuffing would have been a great way to use it. When I make stuffing, I have to do something that my ancestors never did, which is intentionally dry out my bread so that it can absorb the poultry juice that's coming. You could do that by cutting or tearing up your bread, laying it out on a pan, and then just leaving that on top of the fridge or something for a few days. But with dough conditioners, even that might not work so great. I usually just put it in the oven at like 300 Fahrenheit, 150 C for at least half an hour. During that time, I can finally chop my onions, carrots, and celery. The celery is crucial for the classic Thanksgiving taste from my childhood. I just sharpened my knife, so it's cutting really great. Almost as great as my new razor from the sponsor of this video, Harry's, whom I'll now briefly thank. Harry's is a personal care brand that's reinvented the way that I shave, helping me to shave in a premium, hassle-free way. Honestly, I was originally drawn to Harry's because the products look classy. But it's also about more than looks. Harry's has just released their sharpest blades ever from their German factory at shockingly low prices, still just $2 for a refill, and that's sharp enough to split the semantic hairs between stuffing and dressing, let alone the hairs on my face. I love the feel of the weighted handles, I love the scents of the shaving cream and other products, it's musky and manly. Plus, Harry's supports great causes by giving 1% of their global sales to nonprofit organizations that provide mental health care to men in need. You could go online and order this beautiful gift box for the holidays, or you could get this little trial kit for just $3 if you use my link in the description, harrys.com/AdamR. Use that link, you'll be supporting the channel, and you'll get a trial kit for $3. Thank you, Harry's. So we got our veg sliced up. You gotta remember to stir up the bread a few times while you're baking it, or the stuff on the bottom will not dry out. When it's done, you can easily grind it into even finer pieces. Remember that it's gonna rehydrate and expand in the stuffing, so you want the pieces pretty small. You don't have to put an egg in your stuffing, but it does help bind it together. Egg is in bread puddings of all kinds for that very reason. I'll dump in some dried bread, vegetables, seasonings. To me, this is the flavor of Thanksgiving, the combination of dried sage and dried thyme. A little pinch of salt, mix it up, and here we can see why large birds such as chicken and turkeys have always been so likely to be stuffed. They already have a hole in them, the cavity where the bird's organs used to be, and could be again if you chop up your giblets and put them into your stuffing. You could also put in some sausage. A lot of people do that. Some people put in oysters. Oysters often paired with breadcrumbs because they put out so much liquid that needs to be absorbed. The problem, of course, with stuffing the cavity of the bird is that the cavity formerly housed the digestive system, which is the source of all of that pathogenic bacteria we got to worry about with poultry in particular. And the cavity is center mass on this thing, which means the stuffing deep in there is going to be the last place the heat reaches. As you can see, my stuffing has not yet reached a safe temperature, while my white meat is more than done. This is why the United States Department of Agriculture, among other authorities, recommends against actually stuffing the bird. You can instead do what I do every Thanksgiving and melt a huge quantity of butter in a pan. Then I'll cook my chopped onion, carrots, and celery until they're most of the way soft, stirring constantly. Dump in the dried bread, thyme and sage, a big pinch of salt, crack in a couple eggs for binding, and then enough cartoned chicken broth to moisten it a bit. The wetter you like your stuffing, the more broth you should stir in. This is going to be on the wet side. It should be more crumbly if you like it dry. Throw it in the oven uncovered if you want that crispy brown top, which I absolutely do, and 30 to 45 minutes later, it's done. I prefer this method because it's safer and because it can make way more stuffing this way, also with more browned surface area. But a lot of people would argue that is not stuffing because we did not actually stuff it into the bird. It should actually be called dressing. Stuffing is made in the bird, dressing is made outside the bird. But I think a lot of the informed people who would say that are speaking prescriptively rather than descriptively, which is fine. They're saying this is a semantic distinction that we should use so that we can more clearly communicate what exactly we're cooking and eating. But if you want to address this topic descriptively, it's a lot more complicated because if you look at historic recipes from the 19th and early 20th century, dressing and stuffing are used interchangeably. They're still used interchangeably. They're both used to describe foods cooked within the bird or without the bird. What we can say for certain is there's a regional distinction here in the US. Here's people searching Google for Thanksgiving stuffing versus Thanksgiving dressing. The American Southeast is dialectically very distinct from the rest of the country, and down here most people say dressing. I say stuffing because I'm originally from up here in Pennsylvania. There is a commonly held belief that the reason they favor the term dressing down here in the South is because dressing is less profane than stuffing. The South, historically, is more socially conservative than the North, and the term stuffing conjures positively scandalous images of an object penetrating a body between its legs. Heaven forbid! That's a fun story, but for what it's worth, I can find no scholarly or primary source to back it up. Lots of articles on the internet attribute this to an article on the History Channel website that itself cites no primary sources. I would like for that story to be true, but I have no idea if it actually is true. What I do know is that the term dressing more broadly refers to all of the actions necessary to prepare an animal for consumption. It's a very old term used in that sense. It's still used by hunters to describe gutting the animal, skinning it, plucking it. It's a pretty natural leap to refer to all of the stuff that you put on the animal to prepare it as a noun, a substance called dressing that results from the act of dressing. Maybe they say dressing in the South because the South is historically a lot more rural, and therefore terms used by hunters and such would be more likely to be retained in the general dialect. Just an informed guess on my part, and here's another informed guess. If we look on Google Ngrams, we can see that the term turkey stuffing rapidly overtakes turkey dressing in popularity right around 1970. What happened around then? Well, a woman named Ruth Seams invented stovetop stuffing, the first mass-market stuffing in a box. She was a northerner, so naturally she called it stuffing, though ironically, the virtue of her invention is that it allowed stuffing to be prepared entirely outside the bird, covered entirely in the pan on the stovetop. And therefore many people would say it's dressing and not stuffing, but it's stovetop stuffing. That's the brand name. I'm using the Pepperidge Farm Imitator, by the way, because that's what I grew up eating. It's still my favorite stuffing. Sorry, not sorry. Again, this is just a guess on my part, but it does seem to me that the national marketing campaign for that insanely popular product could have pushed the whole language, in this country at least, toward using stuffing instead of dressing. Whatever you call it, happy Thanksgiving, and go get that wet bread.
Feed me, Seymour.